The wind that morning carried the smell of snow and something darker, a heaviness that settled in Captain Elijah Mercer's chest as he stood before Colonel Harrison's desk at Fort Snelling. Outside the commander's window, the Mississippi River lay frozen beneath a sky the color of old iron. It was December 8, 1842, and Mercer had been summoned before dawn. "They're squatting on land that's been surveyed for settlement," Colonel Harrison said, not looking up from the map spread before him. His finger traced a line through dense forest 30 miles northwest. "Dakota Band. Maybe 40 souls, mostly women and children. Their elder refuses to acknowledge the new boundaries established by the treaty." Mercer studied the map, noting how far the location sat from any established trail. 40 people, sir? In this weather? They'll be starving by spring if they haven't already. Which makes them desperate," Harrison interrupted, finally meeting Mercer's eyes. The colonel was a veteran of the Florida campaigns, his face weathered like old leather. "Desperate Indians are dangerous Indians, Captain. Last month they killed 2 trappers found on what they claim is sacred ground, shot them full of arrows and left them for the wolves." The captain shifted his weight. He was 34, a career soldier who'd earned his commission through competence rather than connections. He'd fought Seminoles in the swamps and Sauk warriors along the Rock River. He knew the difference between combat and slaughter. "With respect, sir, taking a full detachment against starving families seems—" "I'm not asking for your moral assessment, Mercer." Harrison rolled up the map with sharp, angry movements. "I'm giving you direct orders. You'll take 27 men, enough to make an impression, but not so many you can't move quickly. You'll find this band, inform them they're in violation of federal law, and escort them to the reservation at Traverse des Sioux. If they resist, you have authority to use whatever force necessary." Mercer felt his jaw tighten. "And if they don't resist? If they're simply too weak to move?" For the first time, something resembling sympathy flickered across Harrison's face. "Then you do what mercy allows, Captain. But you don't come back without resolving this situation. Congress is screaming for progress reports on settlement expansion. We need these territories cleared and documented before the spring thaw brings new settlers. This is the last loose end in this district." The captain accepted the orders, the paper crackling in his gloved hand. As he turned to leave, Harrison called after him. "Mercer, take young Keene with you. Samuel, the interpreter's son who's been hanging around the fort. He speaks their language, knows their customs, might help keep things civil. The boy's barely 19, sir. Then it'll be educational." Harrison had already returned to his paperwork, the discussion finished. Outside, Mercer found Samuel Keene exactly where he'd been told, in the stables, helping the blacksmith shoe horses. The young man was tall and lean, with his mother's dark eyes and his father's Scottish jaw. His father, Thomas Keene, had been a respected interpreter before consumption took him the previous winter. Samuel had inherited his father's gift for languages and his understanding of Dakota culture, having spent his childhood in trading posts along the Minnesota River. "Mr. Keene," Mercer said, watching the young man straighten from his work, "I need an interpreter. 3 weeks, maybe 4, into Dakota territory." Samuel's face revealed nothing, but his hands stilled on the horse's hoof. "Which band, Captain?" "Elder named—" Mercer consulted his orders. "Chayton. Means falcon in their tongue, supposedly." The color drained from Samuel's face. "Chayton, you're going after Chayton's people. You know him?" Samuel set down his tools carefully, as if they might break. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight that made Mercer pay attention. "My father knew him, called him the wisest man he'd ever met, Indian or white. Chayton was a medicine man, a healer. He had 2 sons and a daughter. That was before the raid 2 winters ago." "What raid?" "Different detachment, different captain. They were supposed to relocate a Dakota village south of here. Things went wrong. Confusion, fear. Someone fired a shot. When the smoke cleared, 14 Dakota were dead." Samuel's eyes fixed on something distant. "Chayton's sons were among them. His daughter died of fever in the relocation camp a month later. The Army called it an unfortunate incident and closed the investigation." Mercer felt ice forming in his stomach that had nothing to do with the December cold. "And now we're going after what remains of his band. Now you're going after a man who has nothing left to lose." Samuel corrected quietly. "Captain, I'll go with you because you'll need someone who can speak to them properly with respect. But I'm telling you now, Chayton isn't like other elders. He understands our world as well as his own. My father said he could read and write English better than most soldiers, that he'd studied history, philosophy, military tactics from traders' books, If he's chosen to stay in that forest, defying the army, he has a reason. The reason doesn't matter, Mercer said, though his conviction sounded hollow even to himself. Orders are orders. Yes, sir. Samuel's formality was precise, almost mocking. When do we leave? Tomorrow at dawn. Pack for 3 weeks minimum. Winter gear, snowshoes, whatever you need for hard travel. That night, Mercer assembled his men in the fort's main hall. The 27 soldiers he'd selected were good men, mostly. Veterans of frontier service who knew how to handle the cold and the isolation. Sergeant William Cross, his second in command, was a bull of a man from Pennsylvania, reliable and unimaginative in the best possible way. Corporal James Holder could track game across bare rock. Private Timothy Wells had the steady hands of a natural marksman. But there were also men like Private Richard Lowe, young and eager to prove himself, who talked too loudly about Indian savagery and collected scalps as trophies, and Private Marcus Finn, whose eyes carried the flat, dead look of a man who'd learned to enjoy violence. "We're not going to war," Mercer addressed them, his voice carrying across the hall. "We're executing a removal order. These are starving people, most of them women and children. We'll approach with respect, we'll offer assistance with their relocation, and we'll use force only if attacked. Is that understood?" A chorus of, "Yes, sir," echoed back, but Mercer noticed how some of the men exchanged glances. They'd heard speeches like this before. They knew how these situations usually ended. Sergeant Cross approached after the briefing, his broad face troubled. "Captain, permission to speak freely?" "Granted. The men are wondering why we're doing this now. In the dead of winter, when even the Indians are hunkered down waiting for spring. Seems like we could wait until March, when travel's easier and they're weaker from winter hunger." Mercer had wondered the same thing but would never admit it to his sergeant. "Our orders are clear, Cross. We move at dawn." That night, unable to sleep, Mercer wrote in his journal by candlelight, December 8th, 1842. Received orders to remove Dakota band under elder named Chayton. Harrison calls them squatters and troublemakers. Young Keene calls their leader a scholar and a grieving father. I find myself wondering which version of the truth will meet us in those frozen woods. Tomorrow we march toward something I cannot name but already dread. God grant us wisdom and mercy in equal measure. He didn't know, as he blew out the candle, that this would be one of the last entries he'd ever make. That within 2 weeks his journal would be found clutched in frozen fingers, its final pages revealing a descent into terror that would haunt American military folklore for generations. Outside, snow began to fall, soft and silent, covering Fort Snelling like a burial shroud. They left Fort Snelling on December 9th, 28 men moving northwest into wilderness that grew darker and deeper with each mile. The first 2 days passed without incident, following established trappers' trails through pine forests where the snow lay pristine and unmarked. The men were in good spirits, making crude jokes and laying bets on how long the savages would hold out before surrendering. Samuel Keene rode near the front beside Captain Mercer, saying little, his eyes constantly scanning the tree line. On the third day, as they left the last marked trail and pushed deeper into unmapped territory, the young interpreter finally spoke. "We're being watched." Mercer's hand moved instinctively toward his pistol. "Where?" "Everywhere. Nowhere. They know we're here, Captain. They've known since we left the fort." Samuel pointed to a cluster of pines where snow had fallen in an unnatural pattern. "Someone climbed that tree recently. And there," he indicated tracks barely visible under fresh snowfall. "A hunting party passed through here this morning, moving parallel to our path. Should we be concerned?" Samuel's laugh was bitter. "That depends on whether you consider being led exactly where they want us to go a concern, sir." Sergeant Cross overheard and spurred his horse forward. "Led? We're following the colonel's map." "Are we?" Samuel pulled out the map, comparing it to the terrain. 3 times in the last hour we've had to detour around obstacles, fallen trees, thick brush, unstable ground. Each time there was a clearer path just slightly to our left or right. We've been herded like cattle, Sergeant, so gradually you didn't notice." Mercer studied the map, then the darkening forest around them. Samuel was right. The route they'd actually traveled diverged significantly from their planned course, always choosing the path that seemed most natural, most obvious. They were perhaps 10 miles from where they should be. "Captain Mercer," Private Wells called from the rear. "Sir, you need to see this." They found Wells standing before a massive oak tree, its trunk carved with symbols. Not the crude markings of territory, but precise, deliberate pictographs arranged in vertical columns. Samuel dismounted, approaching the tree with visible reluctance. "What does it say?" Mercer asked. Samuel traced the symbols with gloved fingers, his breath forming clouds in the freezing air. "It's a message. For us specifically." He turned, his face pale. "It says, 'Welcome, Captain Mercer. The falcon watches. The forest remembers. Come feast at our fire and speak of justice.'" The men murmured uneasily. Several made signs against evil, despite their Protestant upbringings. "How does he know my name?" Mercer demanded. "Chayton knows everything about this detachment," Samuel said quietly. "Fort Snelling isn't exactly secure. Traders, hunters, Indians who work as scouts. Information flows like water, Captain. He knows your name, probably knows how many men you brought, what supplies you're carrying, maybe even what orders you're operating under." Private Lowe laughed nervously. "Just Indian tricks. Trying to spook us." "It's working," Corporal Holder muttered. Mercer made his decision. "We continue, but from now on we assume we're under observation. Double the watch rotation. No one leaves camp alone, not even to relieve themselves. Cross, I want scouts out 50 yards in all directions during March." That night they made camp in a clearing that seemed perfect, protected from wind, close to water, with good sight lines. Too perfect, Samuel warned, but they had no choice. The temperature had dropped savagely, and several men were showing early signs of frostbite. Mercer sat by the fire writing in his journal while around him, soldiers huddled in their bedrolls speaking in whispers. December 11th, 3 days out, and already the men are spooked. Can't blame them. This forest feels wrong. Too quiet, too watchful. Keene says we're being herded, and I believe him. But to what? Tomorrow we should reach the approximate location of Chayton's camp. I intend to approach peacefully, present our orders, offer whatever assistance they need for relocation. Perhaps this will end without bloodshed. Perhaps. He looked up to find Samuel sitting across the fire, cleaning his rifle with practiced motions. "Tell me about him," Mercer said. "Chayton, really tell me." Samuel was quiet for a long moment. "My father met him 15 years ago when Chayton's band still lived along the Minnesota River. This was before the treaties, before everything changed. Chayton was young then, maybe 30, already recognized as a holy man and healer. But what made him different was his curiosity about the white world. He learned English, French, even some Latin from a Jesuit missionary who passed through. He collected books, bought them from traders, borrowed them, copied passages by hand. My father said Chayton's lodge had more books than some frontier schoolhouses. He studied everything: European history, military strategy, medicine, philosophy. He wanted to understand the people who were taking his world." Mercer poked at the fire with a stick. "Didn't help him much in the end, didn't it?" Samuel's eyes reflected the flames. "When that raid happened 2 winters ago, Chayton could have led his warriors in retaliation, could have ambushed the next patrol, killed every soldier in revenge. But he didn't. He took what remained of his people, maybe 30 souls, and disappeared into this forest. The army declared victory, said the savage had been subdued, and forgot about him. Until now." "Until now?" Samuel set down his rifle. "Captain, I need you to understand something. The man we're going to meet tomorrow isn't some ignorant savage who'll be awed by your uniforms and guns. He's someone who's studied military tactics, who understands how soldiers think, how they operate. And he's had 2 years of grief and isolation to plan for this moment. You think he wants war? I think he wants justice. And I think he's spent 2 years figuring out how to get it from men who have all the guns and none of the wisdom." A scream cut through the night. High, terrified, quickly silenced. The entire camp erupted, soldiers scrambling for weapons. Mercer and Cross rushed toward the source of the sound, finding Private Finn standing at the edge of the clearing, shaking. "What happened?" Mercer demanded. Finn pointed into the darkness with a trembling hand. There was someone standing just beyond the firelight, watching. When I called out, they just smiled and stepped back into the trees. Like smoke, sir. Like they weren't even real. Sergeant Cross organized a search, but they found nothing. No tracks, no signs of passage, nothing but virgin snow and silent trees. Yet every man in camp had heard Finn's scream, had felt the presence of something watching from beyond the circle of firelight. They didn't sleep much that night. Dawn broke gray and cold, the sun a pale disk behind heavy clouds. As they broke camp, Private Wells discovered something that sent fresh whispers of fear through the ranks. Arranged in the snow just outside where they'd posted sentries, 27 stones formed a circle with a single feather planted at its center. "What does it mean?" Mercer asked Samuel. The young interpreter's face was grim. "It's a counting. He knows exactly how many soldiers you brought." The feather. He picked it up. A falcon's feather, brown and sharp. "It's his signature. He's telling us he could have killed any of us last night, walked right past your sentries, and we'd never have known until morning." "That's impossible," Cross protested. "We had 4 men on watch rotating every 2 hours." "I know what's impossible, Sergeant," Samuel said quietly. "And I know what I'm looking at. Chayton isn't just in these woods. He is these woods now. Every tree, every shadow, every sound. This is his world, and we're insects crawling through it." 2 hours later they found the Dakota camp. It wasn't what any of them expected. The lodges were arranged in a precise circle around a central fire pit, the structures well maintained despite the obvious poverty of their inhabitants. Smoke rose from several dwellings, and the smell of cooking meat drifted on the wind. Somehow, impossibly, these starving people had food, but it was the silence that struck Mercer most forcefully. No dogs barking, no children playing, no sounds of daily life. Just 30 Dakota people standing in perfect stillness, watching the soldiers approach. And at the center of the circle, standing beside the fire, was Chayton. He was not what Mercer had imagined. Shorter than most warriors, perhaps 50 years old, wearing a simple deerskin tunic and leggings. His hair was gray, pulled back in traditional fashion, his face weathered but intelligent, with eyes that seemed to look through rather than at the approaching soldiers. He held no weapon, made no threatening gesture. He simply waited. Mercer dismounted, Samuel beside him. They approached slowly, hands visible and empty. "Chayton," Mercer said. "I am Captain Elijah Mercer, United States Army. I've been sent to—" "I know why you've been sent, Captain," Chayton interrupted in perfect, unaccented English. "I've been expecting you. Welcome to my home. Please join us by the fire. We have much to discuss." His smile was warm, genuine, and somehow the most terrifying thing Mercer had ever seen. The council fire burned bright as Chayton gestured for Mercer and his officers to sit. The Dakota elder moved with quiet dignity, his every motion deliberate and controlled. Around the circle his people watched with faces carved from stone, revealing nothing. "You're surprised we speak your language so well," Chayton said, settling onto a buffalo robe. It wasn't a question. "You expected grunts and gestures, perhaps some primitive pigeon? The ignorant savage, yes?" Mercer felt his face flush. "I meant no disrespect. You simply assumed." Chayton poured something from a clay pot into wooden cups. "As your Colonel Harrison assumed when he sent you. As every white man assumes who looks at us and sees only obstacles to be cleared from the land." He offered a cup to Mercer. "It's tea, Captain, made from willow bark and mint. It will warm you." Samuel, standing slightly behind Mercer, leaned close. "He's studied you, sir. Everything you do, he's prepared for." Sergeant Cross, uncomfortable sitting across from an Indian as if they were equals, shifted his weight. "We're here on official business. The United States government has decided that land promised to my people in perpetuity actually means until we want it back." Chayton's voice remained calm, almost pleasant. "Yes, Sergeant Cross, I understand. I've read the treaties. All of them. Every word, every clause, every promise broken before the ink dried." He stood and walked to one of the lodges, returning with a leather-bound book. Mercer recognized it immediately, a standard military manual of frontier protocols. Chayton opened it to a marked page. Section 12, paragraph 7. The elder read aloud. "When encountering hostile or uncooperative native populations, commanders are authorized to use minimal necessary force to ensure compliance with federal relocation orders." Minimal necessary force. He looked up at Mercer. An interesting phrase, don't you think? It could mean a firm hand on the shoulder, or it could mean bullets and bayonets. The definition seems to depend entirely on the man giving the orders. Mercer found his voice. "We're not here to start a war, Chayton. My orders are to relocate your people to Traverse des Sioux, yes, where the land is poor, the rations insufficient, and disease runs rampant through the camps." Chayton closed the book. "Tell me, Captain, have you visited Traverse des Sioux? Have you seen the conditions there?" The captain remained silent. He hadn't visited the reservation, but he'd heard stories. Most frontier soldiers had. I have, Chayton continued softly. Last spring I walked there myself to see what fate awaited my people. I watched children starve while Indian agents sold their rations to white settlers for profit. I saw proud warriors reduced to begging, their dignity stripped away like meat from bone. I spoke with elders who'd been promised safety and instead found only a slower, more degrading form of death. He moved closer to Mercer, his dark eyes intense. So when you tell me your orders are to relocate us there, what you're really saying is that your orders are to kill us, just more slowly and quietly than bullets would. Private Lowe, standing guard behind the officers, spat in the snow. We didn't come here for a philosophy lesson, old man. You're on government land, in violation. Chayton's laugh cut through the tension like a blade. Government land. The land my people have lived on for 10 generations is suddenly government land because a document signed in Washington says so. He turned his attention back to Mercer. But you know what fascinates me most about your culture, Captain? Your certainty, your absolute conviction that your way is the only way, that your laws supersede everything else. Nature, tradition, basic human decency. It's remarkable, really, almost admirable in its sheer audacity. Samuel stepped forward, his voice cautious. Chayton, I remember you. My father was Thomas Keene, the interpreter, yes. Chayton's expression softened slightly. Thomas was a good man, one of the few whites who treated us as human beings rather than problems to be solved. I was sorry to hear of his death. He studied Samuel. You have his eyes, and his gift for languages, I'm told. I'm trying to prevent bloodshed, Samuel said. If we could just talk, find some compromise. Compromise. Chayton tasted the word. Your father taught me that word. It means both sides give up something to find a middle ground. But tell me, young Keene, what has your government given up in all these negotiations? They take our land, take our dignity, take our children and try to make them white, and in exchange, they offer us the privilege of not being immediately shot. Is that compromise? Mercer stood, his patience fraying. This is pointless. Chayton, I have my orders. You and your people need to prepare to move. We'll help you pack whatever you can carry and we'll escort you to... No. The word hung in the frozen air, simple and absolute. I'm afraid you don't understand, Mercer said carefully. This isn't a request. This is a lawful order from the United States government, and I'm authorized to enforce it. Oh, I understand perfectly, Captain. Chayton gestured to his people, still standing silent around the circle. What you don't understand is that we've already made our decision. We will not go to Traverse des Sioux. We will not leave this forest. We will die here, on land that remembers our ancestors, rather than die slowly in your prison camp. Sergeant Cross stood, hand on his pistol. That sounds like defiance of a federal order, which gives us authority to... To what? Chayton interrupted, his voice sharp for the first time. To shoot us? 30 people, half of them children? Would that make you feel strong, Sergeant? Would it help you sleep at night? He turned to Mercer. Or perhaps you'd prefer to drag us out at gunpoint, force march us through the winter cold. How many would die on the journey, do you think? Half? More? Mercer felt the situation slipping away from him. This wasn't how these confrontations typically went. Indians were supposed to be either immediately hostile or quickly cowed by military presence. This calm, reasoned defiance was something else entirely. I don't want anyone to die, he said finally. But I have my orders. Give me something to work with, Chayton. Some compromise that lets me report back that the situation is resolved. For a moment, the elder's expression seemed almost sympathetic. You're a good man, Captain Mercer. I can see that. You genuinely believe you can find a solution that satisfies both your conscience and your orders. He sighed. But there is no such solution. Your government wants us gone, and I refuse to go. Someone will have to yield, and I promise you, it won't be us. Then you leave me no choice. Everyone has choices, Captain. You could return to Fort Snelling and report that you found no one here. You could tell Colonel Harrison that we'd already moved on, scattered to other bands. You could choose mercy over duty. I'm a soldier, Mercer said stiffly. I follow orders. Yes. Chayton's eyes grew sad. That's the tragedy, isn't it? You'll follow orders right into damnation, telling yourself you had no choice, that you were just doing your duty. He gestured to the fire. But before you make your final decision, Captain, honor me with one courtesy. Share a meal with us. Break bread with people you're preparing to destroy. Look into their faces, learn their names, understand what you're about to do. Mercer wanted to refuse, to take his men and return to camp, to plan his next move from a position of safety and authority. But something in Chayton's voice stopped him. Not a plea, but a challenge. A test he couldn't quite define. 1 meal, he agreed. Then we returned to our camp to discuss our options. Chayton nodded as if this had been inevitable. 1 meal. What followed was perhaps the strangest experience of Mercer's military career. The Dakota women brought out food, venison stew, cornbread, even fresh fish somehow caught from beneath frozen streams. As the soldiers ate, Chayton introduced his people one by one. "This is Wakinyela, which means little thunder in your tongue," he said, gesturing to a young woman with haunted eyes. "She was promised to my eldest son. They were to be married the spring before your soldiers came. Now she weaves baskets and remembers what could have been. A young boy, perhaps 8 years old, was brought forward. To Dewi. He lost his father to the raid, his mother to fever last summer. Now I raise him as my own, teaching him the old ways so they won't be forgotten." One by one, Chayton transformed faceless savages into individuals. Fathers, mothers, children, each with their own story, their own losses, their own quiet dignity in the face of impossible circumstances. Mercer found himself listening despite his discomfort, found himself seeing these people as something other than obstacles to be removed. Samuel watched him with knowing eyes, understanding exactly what Chayton was doing. As the meal concluded, the elder stood once more. "I thank you for honoring our hospitality, Captain. Now you must return to your camp and decide what kind of man you wish to be. Will you be the soldier who follows orders no matter the cost? Or will you be the man who chooses mercy when the opportunity arises?" "Those aren't the only options," Mercer protested. "In this situation they are. There is no middle ground between destroying us and letting us be. You cannot serve both your conscience and your government. Choose wisely." As Mercer and his men rode back to their camp, the captain's mind churned with uncomfortable truths. Behind him, Private Lowe muttered to the others, "Did you see how they looked at us? Like we're the savages. Like we're the ones in the wrong." "Maybe we are," Corporal Holder said quietly, earning dark looks from several soldiers. That night, Mercer wrote in his journal by firelight, his hand shaking slightly. December 12th. Met with Chayton today. He's nothing like I expected. Educated, articulate, impossibly calm. He's made it clear he won't cooperate with relocation, won't even consider it. I should arrest him, force compliance, but something holds me back. Perhaps it's the way he looked at me, not with hatred but with pity, as if he sees something in me that I don't yet see in myself. Tomorrow I must decide, duty or mercy, orders or conscience. God help me, I don't know which way to turn. He didn't notice, as he closed his journal, that several of his men had already begun showing signs of illness, fever, chills, hallucinations. He didn't notice the way shadows seemed to move at the edge of camp with purpose and intelligence. He didn't notice that the forest had grown quieter still, as if nature itself was holding its breath, waiting for what came next. In the Dakota camp, Chayton sat by his fire long after his people had retired to their lodges. He stared into the flames, his face impassive, and waited. Everything was proceeding exactly as he had planned. The falcon was patient. The forest was patient. And revenge, carefully plotted, required the patience of stone. The first man died on December 14th. Private Timothy Wells woke before dawn, screaming about insects crawling beneath his skin. By the time Sergeant Cross reached him, Wells was clawing at his arms with such force that blood streaked the snow. They restrained him, wrapped him in blankets, poured whiskey down his throat to calm him. Nothing worked. "There's nothing there, Wells," Cross shouted, holding the man's thrashing arms. "You hear me? Nothing there." But Wells could feel them, thousands of tiny legs skittering through his veins, burrowing into his organs, eating him from the inside. He screamed until his voice gave out, until blood vessels burst in his eyes, until his heart simply stopped from the sheer terror of it. Mercer knelt beside the body, checking for signs of violence, poison, anything that might explain this. Wells' arms were torn and bleeding from his own nails, but otherwise unmarked. No wounds, no indication of foul play, just a healthy young soldier who'd apparently frightened himself to death. "Get him wrapped and secured," Mercer ordered quietly. "We'll take him back for proper burial." "Captain," Samuel said from the edge of camp, "you need to see this." They'd found more stones arranged in the snow, 26 this time, with one knocked aside, and beside it, a single word scratched into the frozen earth. Guilty. This is madness, Cross breathed. How did someone get into our camp? We had 8 men on watch. Samuel examined the ground carefully. No tracks, no signs of entry or exit. It's like they just appeared. Private Lowe, his face pale and frightened, spoke up. It's that old Indian. He's cursed us. Put some kind of hex on the camp. There are no curses, Mercer snapped, but even he could hear the uncertainty in his voice. This is psychological warfare, nothing more. Chayton is trying to break our morale, make us see ghosts where there are none. Then explain Wells, Holder demanded. What killed him, Captain? If not a curse, then what? Mercer had no answer. He ordered the men to break camp immediately, to pack everything and prepare to return to Fort Snelling. The mission was over. Whatever Harrison's orders had been, they weren't worth watching his men die in this frozen hell. But when they tried to leave, they discovered their horses were gone. All of them. 28 horses had been picketed in the center of camp, guarded throughout the night. Yet somehow they'd vanished without a sound. The picket ropes had been cut cleanly, professionally, and the trail led north, directly away from Fort Snelling, deeper into the forest. We're being herded, Samuel said, his voice hollow. He's taking away our options one by one. First our confidence, then our horses. Now we can either walk back to the fort, a journey that will take days in this cold and snow, or we can go north, toward wherever he wants us. Mercer gathered his officers for a quick council. Cross argued for an immediate return march on foot. Holder suggested sending a small party back for help while the rest fortified their position. Even as they debated, they could all feel it. The forest closing in, the temperature dropping, and something watching them from beyond sight. The decision was made for them when Private Marcus Finn began laughing. It started as a chuckle, then grew into full-throated hysterical laughter that echoed through the trees. Finn stumbled into the center of camp, pointing at things only he could see, tears streaming down his face. Don't you see them? He gasped between fits of laughter. They're everywhere. In the trees, in the snow, in the shadows, so many of them watching us, waiting. Finn, there's nothing, Mercer began, but Finn cut him off with a scream of laughter so intense it seemed to tear something inside him. He fell to his knees, still laughing, blood beginning to trickle from his nose and ears. They're not angry, Finn wheezed, his laughter turning wet and sick. That's the funny part. They're not angry at all. They're just disappointed, like we're children who should know better. He died still laughing, the sound cutting off abruptly as his body toppled sideways into the snow. 26 soldiers remained. Panic rippled through the ranks. Men grabbed their weapons, formed a defensive circle, prepared to fight an enemy they couldn't see or define. Private Lowe fired his rifle at shadows, screaming about demons and witchcraft. Corporal Holder knelt in prayer, begging God for deliverance. Mercer felt control slipping away like sand through his fingers. He'd trained for combat, for tactical situations, for clear enemies and defined objectives. Not this. Not men dying of terror, while nothing visible threatened them. Captain, Samuel grabbed his arm, his eyes wide. We need to go to Chayton. Now. He's the only one who can stop this. He's causing this. Maybe. Probably. But he's also the only one who can end it. Whatever he's doing, psychology, drugs in the food, actual magic for all I know. We need to negotiate. Beg if we have to. Mercer wanted to refuse, wanted to maintain his dignity and authority. But dignity seemed like a luxury he could no longer afford. He took Cross and Samuel, leaving the rest of the men under Holder's command with orders to stay in camp, stay alert, and for God's sake, stay together. They found Chayton exactly where they'd left him, sitting by his fire, calm as Buddha, as if nothing unusual was happening. Captain Mercer, the elder greeted them without surprise. I wondered how long it would take you to return. 2 deaths? 3? What finally brought you back to my fire? What are you doing to my men? Mercer demanded, too tired for diplomacy. I? Chayton raised an eyebrow. I've done nothing, Captain. I'm an old man sitting by a fire watching winter pass. If your soldiers are dying, perhaps you should ask yourself why. Don't play games with me. I know you're behind this somehow. The stones, the horses, whatever madness is taking my men. Yes, I'm behind it, Chayton interrupted calmly, though perhaps not in the way you imagine. Sit, Captain. You too, Sergeant Cross, young Keen. Let me tell you a story. He poked the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling into the gray sky. When your soldiers came 2 winters ago and killed my sons, I could have chosen revenge. Immediate, violent, satisfying revenge. I could have led our warriors against the next white settlement, killed every man, woman, and child. The thought was tempting. Chaitan's face remained impassive, but his eyes carried oceans of pain. But I'm not a savage, despite what your people believe. I'm a man who studied your culture, your history, your way of thinking. And I know that violence against white settlers would only bring more soldiers, more guns, more death. It would solve nothing and doom what remains of my people. Then what is this? Cross demanded. What are you trying to accomplish? I'm teaching you, Chaitan said simply. Teaching you what it feels like to be us, to be hunted in your own home, to watch your people die for no reason you can fight against or prevent, to feel your world shrinking, your options disappearing, until all that's left is fear and inevitability. He stood, walking to the edge of his camp. I've done nothing to your men, Captain. No poison, no magic, no physical harm of any kind. I've simply created an environment where their own minds do the work. The stones, arranged while they slept, teaching them their guards, see nothing. The horses, led away by people who know these woods better than any white man. The deaths, stress, fear, sleep deprivation, and the human mind's remarkable ability to destroy itself when given the right catalyst. Samuel stepped forward. You're saying they're killing themselves? With fear? I'm saying I'm showing them a mirror. Chaitan corrected. Your Captain Mercer came here with 27 soldiers to remove 30 starving Indians from their homes. He had every advantage, weapons, numbers, authority of law. Yet now his men are dying, while mine are untouched. Why? Because we understand this land and they don't. Because we've accepted our fate while they still cling to the illusion of control. Because in this forest, in this moment, we are predators and they are prey. Mercer felt something break inside him. Not his spine or his courage, but his certainty. What do you want? Mercy? Surrender? Tell me what it takes to end this. I want you to understand, Chaitan said softly, to really understand what you've been doing to my people for years. I want you to feel what we feel. And then I want you to go back to Fort Snelling and tell Colonel Harrison exactly what happened here. Tell him about the educated savage who never raised a weapon but defeated a military detachment. Tell him about the 27 soldiers who died without a wound because they finally, for the first time, experienced life from an Indian's perspective. You're insane, Cross whispered. Am I? Chaitan smiled sadly. Or am I the sanest person in this forest? I've committed no crime your laws would recognize. I've harmed no one directly. If your men are dying, it's because they're killing themselves with their own fear and guilt. How will you explain that in your report, Captain? How will you tell your superiors that you lost an entire detachment to an old man who simply made them think? Mercer stood on shaking legs. I'm taking my men and leaving. We're marching back to Fort Snelling immediately, and if you try to stop us, I won't stop you, Chaitan interrupted. The forest will. The cold will. Your own minds will. But by all means, try to leave. See how far you get. They returned to camp to find chaos. 4 more men had died in their absence, 2 from apparent heart failure, 1 from self-inflicted wounds as he tried to cut out the poison he felt burning in his chest, and 1 who'd simply wandered into the trees and frozen to death, a smile on his face as if he'd found something beautiful in the snow. 22 soldiers remained, and every one of them looked haunted. We're leaving, Mercer announced. Now, grab essential supplies only. We march back to Fort Snelling and we don't stop for anything. They tried. God knows they tried. But within an hour of setting out, they were hopelessly lost. The sun disappeared behind clouds, the snow began falling heavily, and every trail looked exactly like every other trail. Men began seeing things in the trees, faces, figures, their dead comrades reaching out with frozen hands. By nightfall, they'd traveled in a complete circle, arriving back at their original campsite. The fire they'd extinguished that morning was burning again, as if they'd never left. Private Lowe went mad first, screaming about justice and guilt, firing his rifle randomly into the forest until it clicked empty, then beating his own head against a tree until he collapsed. 17 men remained. That night Mercer made his final journal entry. December 16th. We're going to die here. All of us. I understand that now. Chaitan hasn't laid a finger on us, hasn't done anything I could report as an attack or crime. Yet we're being systematically destroyed. The men see devils in every shadow. Half are sick with fever, the rest mad with fear. I've failed them. Failed my duty, my orders, my conscience. Perhaps Chaitin is right. Perhaps this is justice. We came to remove people from their homes, and now we're learning what it feels like to have everything taken away. God forgive me. God forgive us all. The next 5 days blurred together in a nightmare of cold, fear, and death. Men died in their sleep, died while standing watch, died while eating or praying or simply staring into the fire. No wounds, no violence, just the slow collapse of body and mind under impossible pressure. Mercer watched it all with growing detachment, as if observing from outside his own body. He saw Sergeant Cross, that bull of a man, reduced to a whimpering child before freezing to death. He saw Corporal Holder pray himself into a fever that burned him from the inside. He saw Private Lowe finally find peace by walking into the forest and never returning. One by one, the soldiers fell, until only Mercer and Samuel remained. On December 22nd, 2 weeks after leaving Fort Snelling, Captain Elijah Mercer sat by a dying fire and looked at the young interpreter. "Why haven't we died?" he asked. His voice was hoarse, empty. Samuel, somehow still sane despite everything, fed another branch into the flames. "Because Chaitin needs a witness, someone to tell the story, someone to survive and carry the message back. Why you? Because I'm half Dakota. Because my father was his friend. Because I tried to stop this before it started." Samuel met Mercer's eyes. "And why not you? Because you need to bear the weight of what happened here. You need to live with it. Remember every face, every death, every moment of failure. That's your punishment, Captain. Survival." Mercer laughed, a broken, defeated sound. "He's a monster." "No," Samuel said quietly. "He's a father who lost his children to men following orders. He's a leader watching his people starve while promises are broken. He's a human being who found the one way to fight back that your government can't defend against or punish. He's shown that Indians aren't stupid or savage. They're people who understand strategy and psychology just as well as any West Point graduate. Maybe better." The fire crackled in the silence that followed. "What happens now?" Mercer asked. "Now you decide. You can stay here and freeze to death with your men, adding your body to the count, or you can live, walk back to Fort Snelling and tell them everything. The choice is yours." In the end, there was no choice. Mercer was too broken to die by his own hand, too disciplined to give up entirely. On December 23rd, he and Samuel began the long walk back to Fort Snelling. They found Chaitin one last time, standing at the edge of his camp. 27 soldiers dead without a wound, the elder said. An impossible story. A ghost tale to frighten soldiers around winter fires. "Who will believe you, Captain Mercer?" "The truth will come out," Mercer whispered. "Will it? Or will Colonel Harrison write a report about Indians attacking your camp? About a heroic last stand? About the savage nature of the enemy? Will your government admit that an old man with no weapons defeated a military detachment through nothing but patience and psychology? Or will they bury the truth and invent something more acceptable? Mercer had no answer. In the depths of his soul, he knew Chaitin was right. This story was too strange, too uncomfortable. It would be rewritten, sanitized, turned into legend. The Dakota elder who outwitted the U.S. Army would become a supernatural curse, a bogeyman, anything but what he really was. A grieving father who'd studied his enemy and found their greatest weakness, their own minds. "I'll tell the truth," Mercer said finally. "Whatever they do with it, I'll tell what really happened here." Chaitin nodded slowly. "Then go, Captain. Carry my message back to your colonel. Tell him that Chaitin of the Dakota sends his regards. Tell him that we will not go to Traverse des Sioux, that we will die free in this forest if we die at all. And tell him," the elder's eyes grew distant, "tell him that revenge is not always loud or violent. Sometimes it's as quiet as falling snow and just as inevitable." Samuel and Mercer walked away from the Dakota camp for the last time. Behind them, Chaitin's people began to sing, not a war song or a death song, but something else entirely. A hymn of survival, of dignity, maintained against impossible odds, of a small victory carved from overwhelming defeat. It took them 4 days to reach Fort Snelling, 4 days of struggling through snow and cold, of Mercer waking from nightmares screaming, of Samuel keeping them both alive through sheer determination. When they finally stumbled through the fort's gates on December 27th, frostbitten and half-mad, They found Colonel Harrison waiting. "Report, Captain," Harrison demanded, his face grim. He'd sent out 2 search parties when Mercer's detachment failed to return on schedule, but winter storms had forced them back. Mercer stood at attention, though his body swayed with exhaustion. 27 men dead, sir." The Dakota elder refused relocation. He what, Captain? Did they attack you? Fight back?" "No, sir, he never touched us, never raised a weapon. He made us see, made us understand." "Understand what, damn it?" Mercer met his commander's eyes. "What it feels like to be them, sir. What it feels like to watch your world end and be powerless to stop it." The official report, written a week later after Mercer had recovered enough to coherently describe events, was heavily edited by Colonel Harrison. The psychological warfare was attributed to savage witchcraft and possible contamination of food supplies. The systematic breakdown of military discipline was blamed on harsh weather conditions and possible ambush tactics. The fact that an educated Dakota elder had defeated a military detachment without firing a shot was buried under layers of euphemism and misdirection. But soldiers talk, stories spread, and soon the tale of the day 27 soldiers died without a wound was being whispered around frontier forts from Minnesota to Montana. The details changed with each telling. Some said Chayton was a witch doctor who could kill with a glance, others that the forest itself had turned against the soldiers. But the core truth remained. An old Indian man had defeated the U.S. Army with nothing but knowledge and patience. Mercer was quietly transferred to a post in Kansas, far from Minnesota territory. He served out his commission without distinction, retiring in 1848. He never spoke publicly about what happened in that forest, but his journal, discovered after his death in 1872, told the true story of how pride, ignorance, and systemic injustice had been turned into weapons against those who embodied them. Samuel Keene stayed in Minnesota, working as an interpreter and advocate for Dakota rights until his death in 1868. He never forgot those 2 weeks in the forest, never stopped trying to help others understand what Chayton had taught them. As for Chayton and his people, they disappeared into legend. Some say they stayed in that forest, living free until the land itself was taken from them. Others claim they scattered to other bands carrying the story of the shaman's revenge with them. The truth, as always, is probably simpler and sadder. They likely died over the following years, victims of cold, hunger, or disease, their small rebellion forgotten by all but those who lived it. But on winter nights in Minnesota, when the wind howls through bare trees and snow falls silent and heavy, some still claim to hear singing in the forest. Not a death song, but a hymn of survival. The voice of a people who refused to go quietly, who found a way to fight back using the only weapons they had: patience, knowledge, and the terrible power of truth. And somewhere in those frozen woods, 27 stones lie arranged in a circle, marking the place where soldiers learned too late that their greatest enemy was not the savage they'd been sent to subdue, but the human being who'd been reduced to that title by their ignorance. The falcon still watches. The forest still remembers. And the legend of Chayton's revenge endures, not as a ghost story or a supernatural tale, but as a reminder that intelligence, dignity, and patience are sometimes more powerful than any weapon forged by man.